Billionaire wife staged her death to catch her cheating husband when the world thought she was dead. She watched her husband celebrate her funeral, with his mistress on his arm. The diamond-encrusted invitation to her own funeral arrived exactly 1 week after Alexandra Sterling drowned in the Mediterranean, or so her husband believed. But from her suite at the Grand Hotel Prague, the billionaire heiress watched the live stream of her memorial service with cold satisfaction, waiting for the moment her cheating husband would finally slip up and reveal the mistress he'd been hiding for 3 years. Before we go into details, click subscribe, like and comment where you're watching from. I would be glad to know this story goes as far as Canada, all of the United States of America, Australia, Africa, and even the United Kingdom. So let me know where you're watching from on comment section. I pray may the good God Almighty bless and preserve you all and your family. Amen. Let's begin. The crystal chandeliers of the Ashford mansion cast dancing shadows across marble floors that had witnessed 20 years of what the world believed was a perfect marriage. Victoria Ashford stood before her bathroom mirror at 3 a.m., trembling hands clutching the edge of the imported Italian sink. Staring at a woman she no longer recognized, her reflection told a story of elegant decay. Designer clothes hanging on a frame that had grown thinner with each passing month. Emerald eyes that once sparkled with joy now dulled by constant tears shed in private, and the kind of exhaustion that no amount of luxury could cure. At 42, Victoria was still breathtakingly beautiful, but beauty meant nothing when the man who once worshipped it now barely glanced her way. The text message on her phone glowed like a beacon of betrayal in the darkness. She'd found it purely by accident when Marcus, her husband of 2 decades, had left his phone on the breakfast table that morning. One simple swipe to check the time, and her entire world had shattered into irreparable pieces. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? The message was from 3 hours ago. 3 hours ago, when Marcus had claimed he was in a late-night board meeting. 3 hours ago, when Victoria had been lying awake in their king-sized bed, wondering when her husband had become a stranger. This wasn't the first sign. God, she wished it were. The late nights had started 6 months ago, subtle at first. An extra hour here, a weekend business trip there. Then came the emotional distance, the way he'd flinch when she touched him, as if her hands carried some contagious disease. The perfume that wasn't hers lingering on his suits. The way he'd started working out obsessively, buying new clothes, caring about his appearance in ways he hadn't since their early dating years. Victoria had ignored it all, making excuses that would have been laughable if they weren't so pathetic. He was stressed about the merger. The company was expanding into Asian markets. He was going through a midlife crisis. Anything but the truth that was now staring her in the face through a simple text message. She'd met Marcus Ashford when she was 22, fresh out of Stanford with a degree in art history and dreams of opening her own gallery. He'd been 28, already making waves in the tech industry with innovative software that would eventually make him a billionaire. Their meeting had been straight out of a romance novel, a charity auction where she'd been volunteering, and he'd bought every piece she'd recommended, not because he cared about the art, but because he wanted an excuse to keep talking to her. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of private jets, handwritten letters, surprise trips to Paris just to have dinner at her favorite restaurant, and declarations of love that made her believe in fairy tales. Marcus had been attentive, passionate, and completely devoted. He'd promised her the world, and for 20 years he'd delivered. Everything except the one thing that mattered most. His heart. Victoria had given up her gallery dreams when their first child was born. Emma had arrived 2 years into their marriage, a perfect bundle of joy with Marcus's dark hair and Victoria's green eyes. Then came James 3 years later, completing their picture-perfect family. She told herself that being a mother and Marcus's wife was enough, that her own ambitions could wait. The gallery could happen later, when the children were older, when life was less chaotic. But later never came. The children grew up in exclusive boarding schools, coming home for holidays and summers, and suddenly Victoria found herself at 42 with an empty nest and an empty marriage, having sacrificed everything for a man who was now texting another woman at midnight. The worst part wasn't even the infidelity itself, it was the gaslighting. For months, Marcus had made her feel crazy for questioning him. He'd accused her of being paranoid, insecure, and suffocating. He'd suggested therapy, not for their marriage, but for her trust issues. He'd made her doubt her own intuition until she'd started to believe that maybe she was the problem. Standing in that bathroom at 3 a.m., something inside Victoria snapped. Not in a dramatic, explosive way, but in a quiet, resolute manner that was somehow more powerful. She was done being the dutiful wife who looked the other way. She was done making excuses for a man who'd stopped respecting her years ago. She was done being Victoria Ashford, the beautiful, accomplished wife who'd become nothing more than an accessory to her husband's success. She wanted the truth. All of it. Who was this woman? How long had it been going on? Were there others? And more importantly, what did Marcus really think of her? The woman who'd stood by his side through every challenge, who'd given up her dreams to support his, who'd loved him with every fiber of her being. But Victoria knew Marcus well enough to understand that confrontation would get her nowhere. He was a master manipulator, a brilliant businessman who could talk his way out of anything. He'd deny, deflect, and gaslight her until she questioned her own sanity again. No, confrontation wasn't the answer. She needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. She needed to catch him in a lie so blatant that even his silver tongue couldn't explain it away. And as she stood there in the darkness, an idea began to form. Dangerous, extreme, and absolutely insane. What if she disappeared? Not permanently, of course. But what if Victoria Ashford, beloved wife and mother, suddenly vanished from the face of the earth? What if Marcus believed she was dead? What would he do? How would he react? Would he grieve, or would he celebrate his newfound freedom? Would he finally show his true colors when he thought no one was watching? The plan crystallized in her mind with startling clarity. She'd stage her death. Nothing too dramatic, a car accident on the coastal highway, perhaps. The cliffs were notorious for accidents, and the ocean was deep enough that bodies weren't always recovered. She'd disappear, let Marcus believe she was gone, and watch from the shadows as his true self emerged. It was crazy. Absolutely, certifiably insane. It was the kind of thing you read about in thriller novels, not something a rational, educated woman would actually do. But Victoria was beyond rational. She was a woman scorned, betrayed, and desperate for the truth. She spent the next 2 weeks planning with the precision of a military operation. First, she needed allies, people who could help her pull off the impossible without judgment. She thought of her sister, Caroline, who lived in Boston and had never particularly liked Marcus. Caroline was a criminal defense attorney with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. If anyone could help her navigate the legal and practical implications of faking her death, it was Caroline. The phone call was brief and to the point. "Caro, I need your help with something. It's going to sound insane, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." Caroline's response, after 20 minutes of explanation, was exactly what Victoria needed. "I always knew that bastard was cheating on you. When do we start?" Together, they crafted a plan. Victoria would withdraw cash gradually from her personal accounts. Nothing large enough to raise red flags, just small amounts that added up. She'd store clothes and essentials at a storage unit an hour away from the city. She'd establish a false identity with Caroline's help, using the contacts her sister had made over years of criminal defense work. The hardest part was the emotional preparation. Victoria wrote letters to her children, to be delivered only if something actually happened to her. She updated her will, making sure Emma and James would be taken care of regardless of what their father did. She documented everything. Every late night, every suspicious text, every lie she'd caught Marcus in. She stored it all in a cloud account only Caroline had access to. The night she chose for her accident was a Thursday, 3 weeks after finding that fateful text message. Marcus was supposed to be in Seattle for a tech conference, returning Saturday. Perfect timing. He'd be far away when it happened, establishing his alibi, making him look innocent. Victoria drove to the coastal highway at sunset, her hands steady on the wheel of her Mercedes, despite her racing heart. She'd chosen a spot where the guardrails were weak, where accidents had happened before. She'd worn the diamond necklace Marcus had given her for their 15th anniversary, the one she knew he'd recognize immediately. She'd left her phone, wallet, and wedding ring in the car. Caroline was waiting at the bottom of the cliff with a friend who owned a private boat. The plan was simple. Victoria would drive the car close to the edge, put it in neutral, and jump out at the last second. The car would plunge into the ocean, and she'd scramble down the cliff to where Caroline was waiting. They'd make it look like she'd been thrown from the vehicle on impact. What Victoria hadn't anticipated was how terrifying it would be to watch her own car tumble over the cliff, crashing through the weak guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal. The Mercedes flipped twice before disappearing into the churning Pacific, swallowed by waves that would keep her secret. For a moment, standing on that cliff edge, Victoria felt a surge of regret. What had she done? This wasn't just crazy, it was criminal. Faking your death was illegal. The insurance fraud alone could land her in prison. What about her children? What would this do to them? But then she thought of Marcus's face when he'd lied to her for the 100th time, the casual cruelty in his voice when he'd suggested she was being paranoid, and the text message that had shattered 20 years of delusions. The regret hardened into resolve. She scrambled down the cliff to where Caroline was waiting with blankets and dry clothes. By the time the police arrived at the scene, alerted by a passing driver who'd witnessed the crash, Victoria was miles away, being driven to a small rental apartment in Portland under the name Sarah Mitchell. The news of her death broke the next morning. Marcus was on the first flight home from Seattle, photographed at the airport looking devastated. The media went wild. Billionaire's wife dies in tragic accident. Victoria Ashford, philanthropist and mother, lost to Pacific Ocean. Tech mogul Marcus Ashford grieves beloved wife. From her tiny apartment in Portland, Victoria watched the news coverage with a strange detachment. There she was, her life reduced to a 5-minute segment on the morning news. Photos from charity galas, her volunteer work at the Children's Hospital, her role on the board of the Art Museum. Everyone describing her as kind, generous, devoted. The perfect wife if only they knew the truth. Marcus's televised statement was a masterpiece of performance. He stood in front of their home, dressed in a somber black suit, his voice breaking at all the right moments. Victoria was the love of my life, my best friend, my everything. I don't know how to exist in a world without her light, without her laughter, without her love. She gave me 2 beautiful children and 20 years of happiness. I will never recover from this loss. Victoria had to turn off the television before she threw something at it. The love of his life? She'd barely seen him in 6 months. His best friend? He didn't even know what books she'd been reading or what kept her up at night. His everything? He'd been texting another woman while claiming to be in board meetings. The performance was flawless, though, Oscar-worthy. If she hadn't known the truth, she might have believed it herself. The funeral was held 5 days later at the cathedral downtown, a grand affair befitting the wife of a billionaire. Victoria watched from a distance, wearing sunglasses and a black wig, standing at the back of the gathered crowd. Emma had flown in from Yale, where she was completing her master's in international relations. James had come from his gap year in Thailand, where he'd been volunteering at an elephant sanctuary. Watching her children grieve destroyed Victoria in ways she hadn't anticipated. Emma stood rigid beside her father, her face a mask of control, but Victoria could see the trembling in her daughter's shoulders. James openly wept, 18 years old and suddenly without his mother. They held each other during the eulogy, and Victoria had to physically restrain herself from running to them, from gathering them in her arms and telling them it was all a terrible mistake. But she couldn't. Not yet. She needed to see this through. What Victoria noticed, however, was who stood a little too close to Marcus during the service. A woman in her early 30s, blonde, beautiful, wearing a black dress that was just slightly too fashionable for a funeral. She touched Marcus's arm in comfort, whispered something in his ear that made him nod. The gesture was intimate, familiar. Caroline, standing beside Victoria in the crowd, followed her gaze. "Is that her?" "I think so," Victoria whispered back. After the funeral, the mystery woman got into a car with Marcus and the children. She went back to the house, Victoria's house, as if she had every right to be there. Through Caroline's investigator contacts, Victoria learned the woman's identity within hours. Amanda Chun, 32, head of marketing at Marcus's company. She'd been hired 8 months ago, right around the time Marcus's late nights had started. She was brilliant, accomplished, and according to her social media, which she'd hastily made private after the funeral, had been on several business trips that coincided with Marcus's travels. The betrayal cut deeper than Victoria had imagined possible. Not only had Marcus been unfaithful, but he'd brought his mistress to his wife's funeral. He'd let her comfort their grieving children. He'd allowed her into the home he'd shared with Victoria for 20 years. But Victoria forced herself to wait. The truth would reveal itself. She just needed patience. that patience was tested over the following weeks as she watched Marcus's life from afar. The elaborate grieving husband act continued for exactly 2 weeks. 2 weeks of black suits and solemn statements. 2 weeks of accepting condolences and playing the devastated widower. Then, slowly, things changed. It started small. Marcus began going out to dinners again, always carefully explained as meeting with lawyers about Victoria's estate or business obligations I can't postpone. Amanda Chun was frequently spotted at these dinners. The tabloids noticed but gave him the benefit of the doubt. After all, she was a colleague, and didn't the poor man deserve support during this difficult time? 3 weeks after the funeral, Marcus threw a party. He called it a celebration of Victoria's life, inviting friends and family to share memories and toast to her legacy. But Victoria, watching through photos posted by guests on social media, saw it for what it really was, a party. People were laughing, drinking expensive champagne, dancing. And there was Amanda, in a red dress that screamed inappropriate, hanging off Marcus's arm. 4 weeks after the funeral, Marcus took Amanda on a grief retreat to the Maldives, the same resort where he and Victoria had spent their 10th anniversary. He posted photos of sunsets and ocean views, with captions about finding peace in dark times. Amanda was conveniently cropped out of the photos, but she was there. Victoria could see her reflection in Marcus's sunglasses, spot her hand in the corner of one beach shot. 5 weeks after the funeral, Marcus stopped wearing his wedding ring. 6 weeks after the funeral, Amanda Chun moved into the Ashford mansion. Victoria watched it all unfold from her Portland apartment, documenting everything, saving every photo, every social media post, every tabloid article. Caroline kept telling her she had enough, that she could come forward now, reveal the truth, and destroy Marcus's carefully constructed image. But Victoria wasn't ready. She wanted more than just proof of infidelity. She wanted to know what Marcus would do when he thought he was free. Would he marry Amanda? Would he rewrite history, telling people that his marriage to Victoria had been unhappy? Would he spend her life insurance money, $2 million, on his mistress? The answer to all those questions turned out to be yes. 8 weeks after Victoria's death, Marcus proposed to Amanda. He did it at the same restaurant where he'd proposed to Victoria 20 years ago, with the same view of the bay, the same champagne, probably even the same words. Amanda posted about it on Instagram before hastily deleting the post, but not before Victoria screenshot every image, every gushing caption about finding love after tragedy and being grateful for second chances. The engagement party was held at the mansion. Victoria drove down from Portland to watch from a distance, parking her rental car across the street with a perfect view of the front entrance. She watched Marcus greet guests with a smile that was too wide, too carefree for a man who'd supposedly lost the love of his life 2 months ago. She watched Amanda show off her ring, a massive emerald, Victoria's favorite stone, surrounded by diamonds. She watched her children arrive. Emma stone-faced and uncomfortable, James looking angry. At least they saw through their father's performance. At least they weren't fooled. Victoria sat in that car for 3 hours, watching her former life continue without her, and something broke inside her that had been barely holding together. The sadness she'd been feeling transformed into pure, cold fury. How dare he? How dare Marcus Ashford throw her away like trash, replace her before her body was even cold, or so he thought, parade his mistress through their home, and act like Victoria had been nothing more than an inconvenient chapter in his life story? She pulled out her phone and called Caroline. "I'm ready," she said simply. "Let's end this." The plan for her resurrection was even more carefully orchestrated than her death. Caroline had been working with a journalist friend who specialized in exposing corporate fraud and personal scandals. They'd been building a comprehensive case against Marcus, documenting not just his infidelity but the suspicious timing of everything. The engagement, Amanda's promotion at the company right after Victoria's death, the life insurance payout that Marcus had already started spending. They also discovered something even more damning. Through Caroline's investigator, they learned that Marcus had taken out an additional life insurance policy on Victoria 6 months ago, right when the affair had started. $5 million with him as the sole beneficiary. He'd forged her signature on the documents, banking on the fact that Victoria never looked at financial paperwork, trusting him to handle everything. That policy, combined with the affair, painted a very different picture than the one Marcus had been presenting to the world. It suggested premeditation. It suggested motive. It suggested that maybe Marcus had been planning for Victoria to disappear long before she'd actually done it herself. The revelation made Victoria's blood run cold. Had Marcus been planning to kill her? Or had he just been hoping for a convenient accident? Either way, the man she'd loved for 20 years had valued her more dead than alive. The date for Victoria's return was set for the 10th week after her death, the evening of Marcus and Amanda's engagement party, the big one with 500 guests and media coverage. It would be held at the Grand Pacific Hotel, the most prestigious venue in the city. Victoria spent the week before preparing herself mentally and physically. She got her hair done, returning to her natural color after 2 months of disguise. She bought a dress. Not the elegant, understated style she used to favor, but something bold, red, and impossible to ignore. She practiced her entrance, her words, her facial expressions. This wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about making a statement. The night of the party, Victoria stood outside the Grand Pacific Hotel, her heart racing so fast she thought she might actually die right there on the sidewalk. Caroline stood beside her, looking fierce and protective in a black suit. "You don't have to do this," Caroline said, "not for the first time. We can release everything to the media, let them tear him apart, and you can stay hidden." But Victoria shook her head. "No, I need to face him. I need to look him in the eye and watch his world collapse the way mine did." The ballroom was spectacular, decorated with white roses and twinkling lights. 500 of the city's most influential people were gathered, celebrating Marcus Ashford's new beginning with the beautiful Amanda Chan. The happy couple stood on a small stage, Marcus giving a speech about love, loss, and second chances. "Victoria's death devastated me," he was saying, his voice carrying through the room via microphone. "I never thought I'd smile again, let alone love again. But Amanda brought light back into my life when I thought all light had gone out. She showed me that it's possible to honor the past while embracing the future. Victoria would have wanted me to be happy. She'd have wanted... Would I, Marcus?" Victoria's voice cut through the ballroom like a knife. Every head turned toward the entrance, where she stood in her red dress, very much alive. The reaction was instantaneous chaos. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone dropped a champagne glass, the crash echoing in the sudden silence. Marcus's face went from tan to paper white in seconds, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Amanda let out a small scream, stumbling backward. Victoria walked into the ballroom with her head held high, her heels clicking on the marble floor with each step. The crowd parted before her like the Red Sea, everyone too shocked to do anything but stare. "Hello, husband," she said, stopping just in front of the stage where Marcus stood frozen. "Surprise. I'm not dead." "Victoria," Marcus finally managed to choke out. "How? What? You're alive." Very observant. "Marcus. Yes, I'm alive. I've been alive this whole time, watching you grieve so convincingly, watching you move your mistress into our home before my body was even cold, or so you thought. Watching you plan a new wedding while my children were still mourning their mother." The crowd erupted in whispers. Phones came out, capturing every moment. This was going to be all over the internet within minutes. "I don't understand," Marcus said, his brain clearly struggling to process what was happening. "Your car, the accident, the funeral, all staged," Victoria said calmly. "Every bit of it. I faked my death, Marcus, because it was the only way to get the truth from you. The truth about your affair, about your lies, about who you really are when you think no one is watching." Amanda, recovering from her shock, tried to step forward. "Marcus told me his marriage was over long before you died. He said you were separated, that you'd grown apart." Victoria turned her gaze to the younger woman, and her laugh was bitter. "Did he? That's interesting, considering we were living in the same house, sleeping in the same bed, and attending couples therapy right up until my death. Tell me, Amanda, how long had you two been screwing before Marcus decided to cash in on my life insurance?" "That's enough." Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out desperate rather than authoritative. "Victoria, you're clearly unwell. You've been through some kind of breakdown. Let me help you." "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you?" Victoria interrupted. "Paint me as crazy, as unstable. Gaslight me one more time. But here's the thing, Marcus, I have proof of everything. Every text message, every dinner date, every business trip that was actually a romantic getaway. I have photos of Amanda moving into our house 3 weeks after my funeral. I have records of you proposing to her at the same restaurant where you proposed to me. And most interestingly, I have documentation of the $5 million life insurance policy you took out on me 6 months ago, the one where you forged my signature. The gasps in the crowd grew louder. This was no longer just a dramatic return from the dead. This was an accusation of fraud, possibly even attempted murder. Marcus's face transformed. The mask of the bereaved widower fell away, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. "You crazy bitch," he hissed, stepping down from the stage. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Faking your death is illegal. You committed fraud. You traumatized our children. You'll go to prison for this." "Maybe," Victoria acknowledged. "But you know what else is illegal, Marcus? Insurance fraud. Forging signatures on legal documents. And I wonder what the police will think about that policy when they start investigating. I wonder what they'll conclude about a man who insured his wife for $5 million, and then she conveniently died in an accident 6 months later." The color drained from Marcus's face again as the implications sank in. Around the ballroom, security guards had appeared, along with several police officers. Caroline had made sure they'd be there for the big reveal. "You set me up," Marcus whispered. "No," Victoria corrected. "I gave you enough rope to hang yourself. You chose to do it. You chose to move on with indecent speed. You chose to bring your mistress to my funeral. You chose to spend my life insurance money on this party. Every choice was yours, Marcus. I just watched." Emma and James appeared at Victoria's side, having pushed through the crowd. Emma threw her arms around her mother, tears streaming down her face. "Mom? Oh my God, Mom, you're alive." James was crying too, holding them both. "We knew something was wrong. Dad was acting so weird, moving on so fast. We knew it." Victoria held her children, feeling their warmth, their realness, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. "I'm so sorry I put you through this," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. But I needed you to know the truth about your father. I needed evidence that couldn't be explained away." The police were moving toward Marcus now, who was trying to back away from the stage. Amanda had disappeared into the crowd, smart enough to distance herself from the impending disaster. "Marcus Ashford," one of the officers said, "we need you to come with us to answer some questions about insurance fraud and forgery." "This is insane," Marcus shouted, looking around at the crowd of his friends, his business associates, his social circle, all of whom were staring at him with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. "She's the criminal. She faked her death. Arrest her. We'll be investigating everyone involved," the officer said calmly. "But right now, we're most interested in this life insurance policy and your signature on these documents." As the police led Marcus away, he turned back to Victoria one last time. The look in his eyes was pure hatred. "You'll regret this. I'll destroy you. I'll take everything, the house, the money, custody of the kids. You'll have nothing." Victoria smiled, and it was the saddest, most knowing smile. "You already took everything that mattered, Marcus. My youth, my dreams, my trust, 20 years of my life. What more can you possibly take? And as for the kids, Emma is 22 and James is 18. They're not children anymore. They get to choose who they want in their lives. And I think we both know who they're choosing." As if to prove her point, Emma and James moved closer to their mother, creating a united front. James looked at his father with barely concealed disgust. "You told us Mom was the love of your life. You cried at her funeral. How could you?" Marcus had no answer for that. He was led away in handcuffs, and the engagement party dissolved into chaos. The aftermath was even more dramatic than Victoria had imagined. The media had a field day with the story. Billionaire's wife returns from the dead to expose cheating husband, the ultimate revenge. How Victoria Ashford faked her death to catch her husband. From death to resurrection. The scandal rocking Silicon Valley. The legal consequences were complicated. Yes, Victoria had committed fraud by faking her death. But the forgery on the life insurance policy, combined with Marcus's suspicious behavior and the speed with which he'd moved on, made prosecutors hesitant to charge her too harshly. The public sympathy was overwhelmingly on her side. a wronged wife who'd taken extreme measures to expose a cheating husband made for compelling television. In the end, Victoria pled guilty to fraud charges and received a suspended sentence with community service, partly because she'd never actually claimed any insurance money herself and had come forward voluntarily. Marcus, on the other hand, faced serious charges for forgery and insurance fraud. The investigation into his business dealings uncovered other irregularities, and what had started as a personal scandal became a full-blown corporate crisis. Amanda Chun resigned from the company and disappeared from public life, her 15 minutes of fame ending in the worst possible way. The engagement ring went back to wherever Marcus had bought it. The divorce was brutal and public. Every detail of Marcus's infidelity came out in court proceedings. Text messages were read aloud. Hotel receipts were presented as evidence. Amanda wasn't his first affair. She was just the most recent in a string of indiscretions that had apparently been going on for years. Victoria learned that the man she'd loved had been a stranger for much longer than she'd realized. The late nights, the business trips, the distance. It had all been lies built on more lies. She'd been faithful, devoted, and completely blind. But the blindness was over now. The settlement was generous. Victoria got the house, a substantial portion of Marcus's assets, and full control of her own life for the first time in 2 decades. More importantly, she got the truth. Painful as it was, 6 months after her dramatic resurrection, Victoria sat in her newly renovated art gallery in downtown San Francisco. The space was beautiful. High ceilings, perfect lighting, walls covered with pieces from emerging artists she'd discovered and nurtured. It was the dream she'd put on hold 20 years ago, finally realized. Emma stopped by after work, looking professional in a tailored suit, carrying coffee for both of them. At 22, she was thriving in her career at a nonprofit focused on international human rights. She'd chosen a path completely different from her father's corporate world, and Victoria couldn't be prouder. "How was your day?" Emma asked, settling into one of the gallery chairs. "Sold 3 pieces," Victoria said with a smile. "And I have an artist coming in tomorrow who does the most amazing work with recycled materials. I think she's going to be huge. Look at you, Mom. Art mogul." Emma's smile was warm, but there was still sadness in her eyes. The events of the past year had changed her, made her more cautious, less trusting. "How are you doing?" Victoria asked, not for the first time. "Really?" Emma was quiet for a moment. "I'm still angry at Dad, and I'm still processing everything that happened. But I'm also angry at you, Mom. What you did, faking your death, it was traumatic. James and I really believed you were gone. We grieved for you." "I know." Victoria had heard this before, would probably hear it many more times. It was deserved. "I'm sorry. I'll never stop being sorry for putting you through that. But I also understand why you did it," Emma continued. "You were desperate. You'd been gaslit and lied to for so long that you felt like extreme measures were the only way to get the truth. I don't agree with what you did, but I understand it." It was more forgiveness than Victoria had any right to expect. She reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Thank you." James was having a harder time. At 18, he'd been younger, more idealistic about love and marriage. Learning that his father was capable of such betrayal, such calculated cruelty, had shaken his worldview. He was back in Thailand now, extending his volunteer work, taking time to process everything away from the media circus. He called Victoria every Sunday, and slowly, their relationship was healing. He told her on their last call that he understood why she'd done what she did, even if he wished there had been another way. That was enough for now. As for Marcus, he'd pleaded guilty to reduced charges and avoided prison time, but his reputation was destroyed. The company had forced him out, his social circle had abandoned him, and he was living in a modest apartment in the suburbs. Modest by billionaire standards, anyway. He tried to reach out to the children several times, but both Emma and James had made it clear they needed space. Victoria didn't feel triumphant about his downfall. She'd wanted the truth and justice, not revenge. Watching Marcus lose everything brought her no joy, just a weary sense of closure. The real victory wasn't in destroying Marcus's life. It was in reclaiming her own. Victoria had spent her 20s and 30s and early 40s living for other people. First for Marcus, then for their children, always putting her own dreams last. Now, at 43, she was finally living for herself. The gallery was thriving. She'd reconnected with old friends she'd lost touch with during her marriage. She'd started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. She'd also started dating, cautiously. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and dinner conversations with men who treated her with respect and genuine interest. It was strange, learning to trust again after everything that had happened. But Victoria was determined not to let Marcus's betrayal turn her into someone bitter and closed off. One evening, about a year after her resurrection, Victoria hosted the gallery's first major exhibition. The space was packed with art lovers, collectors, and journalists. Emma and James were both there, supporting her. Looking proud, a reporter approached Victoria with the inevitable question, "Do you regret it? Faking your death?" Victoria considered her answer carefully. "I regret the pain I caused my children. I regret the extreme nature of what I did. But do I regret learning the truth about my marriage? No. I spent 20 years living a lie. Now I know the truth, painful as it is. And the truth, ultimately, set me free. Would you recommend your approach to other women who suspect their husbands of cheating?" The reporter pressed. Victoria laughed. "God, no. There are therapists, private investigators, and divorce lawyers for a reason. What I did was extreme, illegal, and traumatic for everyone involved. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. But I also won't apologize for doing what I felt I needed to do to reclaim my life and my truth." The reporter seemed satisfied with that answer and moved on to ask about the artists featured in the exhibition. As Victoria circulated through the gallery, accepting congratulations and making connections, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. She'd learned the hard way that happiness could be fleeting and often illusory. But contentment, a deep sense of rightness about her life and her choices, that was real and solid. She'd paid a high price for that contentment. She'd blown up her marriage, traumatized her children, faced criminal charges, and become the subject of a media frenzy that would probably follow her for years. But she'd also escaped a marriage built on lies, discovered her own strength, and reclaimed dreams she'd thought were dead. Late that night, after the exhibition closed and the last guests departed, Victoria stood alone in her gallery, surrounded by beautiful art and the life she'd built from the ashes of her old one. She thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing in that bathroom at 3 a.m., trembling and lost. That woman had been desperate enough to stage her own death. This woman, the one standing in the gallery, was strong enough to live her own life. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "So proud of you, Mom. The gallery is beautiful. You're beautiful. Love you." Tears pricked Victoria's eyes as she typed back, "Love you too, sweetheart. Thank you. Please write the end of the story in this session." 2 years later, Victoria stood on the balcony of her Napa Valley cottage, watching the sun rise over the vineyards that stretched endlessly before her. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of grapes and earth. In her hands, she held a cup of coffee and a letter, the last piece of her old life that still demanded attention. The envelope was from Marcus's attorney. After 2 years of legal battles, appeals, and negotiations, the divorce was finally, completely, irrevocably final. 20 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal documents and a judge's signature. Victoria had thought this moment would feel more significant, more climactic. Instead, it just felt quiet, like closing a book she'd already finished reading months ago. Her phone rang, breaking the morning silence. It was Caroline. "Did you get it?" her sister asked without preamble. "Just arrived," Victoria confirmed, setting down her coffee to open the envelope properly. "It's done, Caro. It's really done. How do you feel?" Victoria considered the question as she scanned the legal paperwork. Relieved, tired, ready to move forward. She paused, then added more honestly, "And a little sad, if I'm being truthful. Not for Marcus. I stopped mourning that marriage a long time ago. But for the girl I was at 22 who believed in fairy tales. For the years I spent trying to be enough for someone who was never going to value me. That girl grew into a woman who had the courage to burn her life down and rebuild it better," Caroline said firmly. "Don't mourn her. Celebrate her evolution." After they hung up, Victoria returned to the balcony. The cottage had been her refuge for the past 6 months. A place away from the city, the media, and the memories. She'd bought it with her settlement money, along with a small vineyard that she was learning to manage with the help of a local vintner. It was hard work, physical and demanding, completely different from the pampered life she'd lived as Mrs. Marcus Ashford. She loved every minute of it. The gallery in San Francisco was thriving under the management of her business partner, a brilliant curator named Diane who shared Victoria's passion for emerging artists. Victoria still traveled to the city twice a week for meetings and openings, but the cottage was home now. Simple, authentic, hers. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was James, video calling from Kenya, where he was now working with a wildlife conservation organization. "Mom!" His face filled the screen, tanned and smiling, a world away from the devastated 18-year-old who'd stood at her funeral. "Did you get the papers?" "Just this morning." "How did you know?" "Dad's lawyer called me yesterday to confirm some final details." "It's really over, Mom. You're free." The word hung in the air between them. Free. "How is he?" Victoria asked, because despite everything, Marcus was still her children's father. James's expression grew complicated. "He's surviving. Living in that apartment in Oakland, working as a consultant. I had lunch with him last month." He saw Victoria's surprise and added quickly, "I'm not excusing what he did. I'll never excuse it. But he's still my dad, and he's clearly miserable. He asked about you. What did you tell him? That you're happy. That you're building a life that actually fulfills you. That you're seeing someone." James grinned. He didn't like that last part much. Victoria laughed. "Well, seeing someone is a generous term for having dinner twice with the nice vineyard owner down the road. Mom, you've had dinner with David 6 times. I'm keeping track. And he looks at you like you're the sunrise." "He's a friend," Victoria protested, but she was smiling. "Ah, keep telling yourself that." James's expression grew more serious. "But really, Mom, I'm glad you're moving on. You deserve to be loved by someone who actually sees you, who values you. Dad never did that, not really. He loved the idea of you, the perfect wife, the beautiful accessory. But he never loved the real you." The observation was painful in its accuracy. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from watching you. You taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself, to demand better, to walk away from situations that diminish you. That was a hard lesson, and it came at a high price, but I'm grateful for it." After they said goodbye, Victoria sat with his words. The price had been high, the trauma she'd inflicted on her children, the legal consequences, the public scandal, the loss of 20 years. But the alternative would have been continuing to live a lie, continuing to make herself smaller to accommodate a man who didn't deserve her. She thought about the life insurance policy Marcus had taken out, that $5 million he'd valued her at when dead. The investigation had revealed he'd been planning to cash it in somehow, though whether through actual murder or just hoping for a convenient accident remained ambiguous. The truth was probably that he'd kept his options open, the policy a safety net for his affair, a way to move on without the messy complications of divorce. The irony was that Victoria had ended up worth so much more alive. The gallery was valued at over $10 million now. Her vineyard, while modest, was producing award-winning wines. Her art collection, pieces she'd invested in over the years, had appreciated significantly. She'd built an empire from authenticity, while Marcus's empire, built on lies and manipulation, had crumbled. But the money didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling she had every morning when she woke up. Peace. The absence of dread, of anxiety, of constantly wondering if today would be the day she'd catch Marcus in another lie. The freedom to make decisions based on what she wanted, not what would keep her husband happy. Her phone buzzed once more. Emma this time with a text. "Dinner tonight? I'm bringing someone I want you to meet." Victoria's heart swelled. Emma had been the most affected by everything that had happened. At 22, learning that love could be so deceptive, that marriage could be such an elaborate performance, had shaken her deeply. She'd thrown herself into work, avoiding relationships, building walls that Victoria worried might never come down. But 6 months ago, Emma had mentioned a colleague at the nonprofit. Then the colleague had become a friend. Then the friend had become more than a friend. And now Emma was bringing someone home to meet her mother. "I'll make my famous lasagna," Victoria texted back. "Can't wait." She spent the afternoon in her kitchen, cooking, something she'd rediscovered during her time in the cottage. As Mrs. Marcus Ashford, she'd had a personal chef. Cooking had been unnecessary, another skill she'd let atrophy. Now, she found joy in the simple act of creating meals, of feeding people she loved. Emma arrived at 6 with a woman named Sophia, intelligent, warm, and clearly devoted to Emma. Victoria watched them together, the way they moved in synchronization, how Sophia anticipated Emma's needs, how Emma's face softened when she looked at her girlfriend. This was what love should look like. Not the performance Victoria had lived through, but this genuine connection. Over dinner, they talked about everything. Sophia's work with refugee resettlement, Emma's recent promotion, Victoria's plans to expand the vineyard. The conversation was easy, full of laughter and teasing and the kind of comfortable silences that only came with genuine intimacy. At one point, Emma reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. "Mom, I want to say something. I know I've said it before, but I need to say it again. What you did, faking your death, it was traumatic and wrong, and I'm still working through it in therapy." Victoria's stomach tightened, waiting for the rest. "But," Emma continued, "I also understand now why you did it. You were trapped in a marriage with a man who'd spent years making you question your own reality. You tried everything else. Counseling, confrontation, even just looking the other way. And nothing worked because Marcus was fundamentally dishonest. So you did something extreme, something desperate, because desperate situations sometimes call for desperate measures. I traumatized you," Victoria said quietly. "I made you grieve for me when I wasn't actually dead. That's unforgivable." "It's not unforgivable," Emma corrected. "It's already forgiven. Not because what you did was right, but because I understand that you were drowning and grabbed onto the only life raft you could see. Was it the right life raft? Probably not. But it got you to shore." Sophia squeezed Emma's other hand, offering silent support. "And honestly, Mom," Emma added, "watching you rebuild your life from nothing, watching you choose yourself after decades of choosing everyone else, watching you become this version of yourself that's so authentic and real, it taught me what I want in life. I want what you have now, not what you had with Dad. I want genuine connection, not performance. I want someone who sees me, really sees me, the way Sophia does." The two women exchanged a look so full of love that Victoria had to blink back tears. "So thank you," Emma finished. "Thank you for showing me what it looks like to choose yourself, even when it's hard, even when it costs you everything. Because sometimes everything you have isn't worth keeping." Later that night, after Emma and Sophia had left, Victoria walked through her vineyard under a sky full of stars. The grapevines stretched out in neat rows, representing months of hard work, early mornings, and physical labor that had left her exhausted and satisfied in equal measure. She thought about the woman she'd been 2 years ago, standing on that cliff, watching her Mercedes plunge into the ocean. That woman had been so desperate, so lost, so convinced that elaborate deception was her only option. That woman had been willing to risk everything, her freedom, her relationship with her children, her sanity, just to know the truth. And the truth had been worse than she'd imagined. Marcus hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been fundamentally deceptive about who he was. The loving husband had been a character he'd played, and he'd played it well enough to convince Victoria for 20 years. But characters eventually break, and when Marcus's character finally shattered, what remained was a stranger who'd valued her more as an insurance policy than as a person. Victoria's phone lit up with a text from David, the vineyard owner. "Saw your lights on. Everything okay?" She smiled and typed back, "Everything's perfect. Just thinking. Dangerous activity. Want company?" She hesitated only a moment before responding, "Yes." 20 minutes later, David appeared at the edge of her vineyard, carrying a bottle of wine from his own label. He was 50, weathered by years of outdoor work, with kind eyes and rough hands that knew how to coax life from soil. They sat on her porch, drinking wine and talking about everything and nothing. David knew her story. Everyone did. It had been impossible to escape the media coverage, but he never treated her like a scandal. He treated her like Victoria, a woman rebuilding her life, someone with dreams and fears and complexity. "The divorce is final," she told him. Not sure why she was sharing, but feeling like he should know. "How do you feel about that?" "Free," she said simply. "Terrified, relieved, all of it at once." David nodded, understanding in his silence. His own divorce had been 10 years ago, a quieter affair than Victoria's but no less painful. He understood loss and rebuilding in ways that most people didn't. You know what the strangest part is? Victoria continued. I don't regret faking my death. I know I should. It was extreme and illegal and hurt people I love. But it was also the only way I could see clearly. Marcus had spent so many years manipulating my reality that I couldn't trust my own perceptions anymore. I needed to step outside my life to see it honestly. And what did you see? That I'd been living in a prison of my own making. That I'd spent 20 years trying to be enough for someone who was never going to value me. That I'd sacrificed my dreams, my identity, everything that made me who I was, for a man who would replace me without a second thought. David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my ex-wife used to tell me I worked too much, that I loved the vineyard more than her. And she was right. I'd wake up at dawn and work until dark. And when she tried to talk to me about our relationship, I'd brush her off. I thought providing for her was enough. I thought the nice house and the financial security meant I was being a good husband. What changed? She left, just packed her bags one day and walked out. And I was so angry at first, so self-righteous. How dare she leave when I'd given her everything? But then I sat alone in our empty house, and I realized I'd given her everything except what she actually needed. My time, my attention, my emotional presence. I'd been so focused on building the vineyard that I'd forgotten to build our marriage. Do you regret it? Every day. But I also learned from it. I learned that work can't substitute for connection, that success means nothing if you're alone, that sometimes the things we think are most important are just distractions from what really matters. He turned to look at her, his expression serious. Which is why I'm taking things slow with you, why I'm not rushing or pushing or assuming anything. Because I want to do this right, Victoria. If we're going to be something, and I hope we are, I want it to be real. Victoria felt something in her chest loosen. A tension she'd been carrying for so long, she'd forgotten it was there. I don't know if I'm ready, she admitted. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust again after everything that happened with Marcus. That's okay. We'll take it one day at a time. One dinner, one conversation, one shared bottle of wine at a time. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other honestly. Honest. The word resonated through Victoria like a bell. That's what had been missing from her marriage. Fundamental honesty. Marcus had performed love while hiding his true self. Victoria had performed the role of perfect wife while suppressing her real needs and desires. They'd both been acting, and the marriage had been the stage. But here, sitting on her porch with David, drinking wine under the stars, there was no performance. Just two imperfect people with complicated pasts, being real with each other. I'd like that, Victoria said softly. They sat together in comfortable silence, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria felt hopeful about the future. Not in the naive, fairy tale way she'd felt at 22, but in a grounded, realistic way that acknowledged life's complexity while still believing in possibility. 6 months later, Victoria stood in the grand ballroom of the San Francisco Art Museum, surrounded by her children, her sister, David, and 300 guests who'd come to celebrate the opening of her new exhibition, Resurrection, Art from the Ashes. The collection featured works from artists who'd overcome trauma, loss, and adversity to create beauty. There were pieces from refugees who'd fled war zones, from survivors of abuse, from people who'd lost everything and rebuilt. And in the center of the main gallery hung Victoria's own paintings, raw, emotional works she'd created over the past 2 years, processing her journey from desperation through resurrection to renewal. The centerpiece was a large canvas titled The Cliff. It depicted a woman standing at the edge of a precipice, watching a car tumble into churning waters below. But the woman wasn't falling with the car. She was sprouting wings. Emma stood beside her mother, studying the painting. Is this how it felt? When you jumped out of the car? No, Victoria said honestly. In that moment, I just felt terrified and desperate. The wings came later, over time, as I learned to fly on my own. A reporter from Art Forum approached, asking for an interview. Victoria had learned to handle the media with grace, neither hiding from her past nor letting it define her present. Your story is extraordinary, the reporter said. Faking your death to catch a cheating husband. It's like something out of a movie. Do you think your experience diminishes the art itself? or does it add context? Victoria considered the question carefully. I think my experience is relevant but not definitive. Yes, I did something extreme and controversial. Yes, my past is part of my story. But the art stands on its own merit. These paintings aren't just about my divorce. They're about transformation, about the courage it takes to shed an old identity and embrace a new one. That's universal, whether someone fakes their death or simply walks away from a toxic situation. Any regrets? Plenty, Victoria admitted. I regret the pain I caused my children. I regret that it took me so long to value myself. I regret the years I wasted trying to be someone I wasn't. But do I regret learning the truth? Do I regret building this new life? Never. And your ex-husband? Have you spoken to him since the divorce was finalized? Victoria shook her head. Marcus and I have nothing left to say to each other. He made his choices and I made mine. The only communication we have now is through our children. And that's how it should be. I've moved on, and I hope he has too. What she didn't tell the reporter was that Marcus had tried to contact her several times over the past few months. He'd sent emails that Victoria had deleted without reading, letters that Caroline had screened, and even showed up at the gallery once, only to be turned away by security. Through Emma, Victoria had learned that Marcus was struggling. His consulting business was failing, his reputation was in tatters, and he was essentially alone. Part of her felt sympathy for him. Despite everything, they'd shared 20 years and 2 children. But a larger part of her knew that engaging with Marcus would only pull her backward, back into old patterns of caretaking and excusing and sacrificing herself for someone who'd never done the same for her, so she'd moved on. Completely and irrevocably. David appeared at her elbow with champagne, and Victoria introduced him to the reporter as my partner. The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. Partner. Not husband, not boyfriend, but someone who walked beside her as an equal. After the reporter left, David kissed her temple. The exhibition is amazing, Victoria. You should be proud. I am, she said, and realized she meant it. Not proud in an arrogant way, but in the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd done hard work and seen it come to fruition. James video called from Kenya, where it was already tomorrow. Mom, I'm watching the live stream. The paintings are incredible. Thank you, sweetheart. I wish you could be here in person. Next time, he promised. I'll be home for Christmas, and we'll celebrate then. But Mom, I wanted to tell you something. I've been talking to Dad. Victoria's heart clenched, but she kept her voice neutral. Okay. He's struggling, and he wanted me to tell you that he's sorry. For everything. He knows it doesn't change anything, and he's not asking for forgiveness, but he wanted you to know. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing. Part of her wanted to feel vindicated, to savor Marcus's apology. But mostly she just felt tired. Thank you for telling me. I appreciate it. Are you okay, Mom? I'm perfect, sweetheart. I'm exactly where I need to be. And she was, standing in a gallery filled with her art, surrounded by people she loved, partnered with someone who valued her, finally living the life she'd always dreamed of. She was more than okay. She was whole. 1 year later, Victoria's 3rd wedding anniversary to David was nothing like her 20th anniversary to Marcus had been. There was no elaborate party, no expensive gifts, no performance for others. Instead, they spent the day working in the vineyard together, their hands dirty with soil, their bodies tired from physical labor, their hearts full. That evening, they sat on the porch of the cottage, now their cottage, and toasted with wine from their own label, Resurrection Vineyards, First Harvest. 3 years since you came back from the dead, David said, his arm around her shoulders. How does it feel? Like a lifetime ago, Victoria admitted. That woman who faked her death. Sometimes I can barely remember her. She was so desperate, so lost. I barely recognize myself. I'm glad you did it, though. Victoria turned to look at him in surprise. Really? If you hadn't, we never would have met. You'd still be trapped in that marriage, still sacrificing yourself for someone who didn't deserve you. I wouldn't have this incredible woman in my life, this partner who challenges me and inspires me and makes every day better just by being in it. Victoria kissed him, tasting wine and possibility. That's a very self-interested perspective, Mr. Chun. Absolutely, he agreed. I'm very selfishly grateful for your midlife crisis and subsequent resurrection. They laughed together, and the sound carried across the vineyard, over the rows of grapevines heavy with fruit, into the darkening sky. Victoria thought about the girl she'd been at 22, so naive and hopeful, believing that love conquered all and marriage was a fairy tale ending. She thought about the woman she'd been at 42, so broken and desperate that she'd staged her own death just to find the truth. And she thought about the woman she was now at 45, who'd learned that sometimes you have to die, metaphorically or literally, to truly live. Who'd discovered that truth, no matter how painful, was better than the prettiest lie. Who understood that building a life from authentic choices, even difficult ones, created something more beautiful than any performance ever could. Emma and James were both coming home for Thanksgiving, and Emma was bringing Sophia. They'd announced their engagement last month, and Victoria had cried happy tears, so grateful that her daughter had found real love, not the performed version Victoria had settled for, but the genuine article. James was bringing someone too, a marine biologist he'd met in Kenya who shared his passion for conservation. Victoria had met her over video calls and immediately liked her honest laugh and sharp intelligence. Her children were thriving, building lives based on authenticity rather than appearance, choosing partners who valued them rather than what they represented. They'd learned from Victoria's mistakes and her courage in equal measure. As for Marcus, Victoria had heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to Seattle, started over in a smaller way. He'd never remarried, though whether that was by choice or circumstance, Victoria didn't know and didn't care. He'd reached out on her birthday with a simple message, "I hope you're happy. You deserve to be." She'd responded with equal simplicity, "I am. I hope you find peace." And then she deleted his number, the last tie to a life that no longer fit. The stars came out over the vineyard, thousands of them, brilliant in the clear country sky. Victoria leaned into David's warmth, feeling grateful for the hard choices that had led her here, for the courage to choose herself even when it meant chaos, for the resilience to rebuild when everything fell apart. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you just divorced Marcus normally?" David asked, reading her thoughts in the way partners do. "Sometimes," Victoria admitted, "I probably would have gotten less jail time and therapy bills. But I wouldn't have learned what I needed to learn. Confronting Marcus directly would have just been more of the same. Me asking for truth, him denying it, both of us stuck in our familiar patterns. Faking my death forced everyone, including me, to show their true selves. It was extreme, probably crazy, definitely illegal. But it was also the only way I could break free from a dynamic that was slowly killing me. No regrets." Victoria thought about her children's tears at her funeral, about the legal fees and the public scandal, about the years of therapy it would take to fully process everything that had happened. She thought about the parts of herself she'd had to sacrifice to pull off the deception, and the parts she'd discovered in the aftermath. "I regret the pain I caused," she said finally, "but I don't regret the outcome. Sometimes you have to burn everything down to see clearly. Sometimes you have to die to learn how to live." David kissed the top of her head. "You're terrifying and inspiring in equal measure. You know that? I'll take that as a compliment." They sat together as night fully descended, two people who'd found each other in the aftermath of their own resurrections, building something real from the ashes of what came before, and Victoria, who'd once been so desperate that she'd staged her own death just to find the truth, finally understood that the truth, painful, messy, complicated as it was, had set her free in ways she'd never imagined possible. She'd died at 42 and been reborn at 43, and the woman she'd become was worth every difficult step of the journey. The documentary premiered at Sundance to critical acclaim. Death, Lies, and Resurrection. The Victoria Ashford story had been 3 years in the making, with Victoria finally agreeing to participate after years of refusing media requests. She'd done it for her children, wanting them to hear her side of the story in her own words, to understand not just what she'd done but why. And she'd done it for other women trapped in marriages built on lies, hoping her extreme example might give them courage to find their own paths to freedom, hopefully through less dramatic means. The filmmaker had interviewed everyone, Emma and James, Caroline, David, even Marcus, who declined to participate but whose absence spoke volumes. The documentary didn't paint Victoria as a hero or a villain, but as a complex woman who'd made desperate choices in a desperate situation. During the Q&A after the premiere, someone asked the inevitable question, "If you could go back, would you do it again?" Victoria, now 50 years old with silver threading through her hair and laugh lines around her eyes that came from genuine joy rather than performed happiness, considered her answer carefully. I would make different choices, she said honestly. I'd be less dramatic, more mindful of how my actions affected my children. I'd seek therapy earlier, trust my instincts sooner, value myself more from the beginning. But would I choose myself over a toxic marriage? Would I burn down a life built on lies to build something authentic? Absolutely. Every single time. The audience applauded, and Victoria looked out at the sea of faces. Some nodding in understanding, some shocked, some clearly judging. She didn't care anymore what strangers thought. She cared what she thought of herself, what her children thought, what the people who truly knew her believed. And those people knew that Victoria Ashford, formerly dead, fully resurrected, was exactly who she was always meant to be. Authentic, flawed, courageous, and finally irrevocably freed at the end.